Hello, fellow members of the Midnight Society. Welcome back to another episode review from the show Are You Afraid of the Dark? Last time, we covered The Tale of the Prom Queen, a story about 3 teens who try to help a ghost get picked up by her date on prom night. Tonight is the Season 1 finale with a Gary story about a teen whose obsession with games leads to some serious consequences. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society, I call this Season 1, Episode 13, The Tale of the Pinball Wizard. We open on a shot of David either playing a video game or having a stroke. I'm really not sure.
I just need a few more points.
In typical douche fashion, Eric resets David's game before he can finish, which causes David to have some kind of mental break.
All I wanted to do was get the key.
Frank takes the game from David and says that he'll beat it. And Kristen then asks how they can all be so obsessed with stupid games, to which Kiki explains that playing the games is like a battle versus good and evil. She says you have to be smart and fast, and most of all, you have to have a lot of patience. Of course, she immediately follows that up with,
Hurry up, it's my turn.
Kristen still doesn't understand, stating that beating the game just doesn't matter. Gary then takes the game and starts the preamble to his story. He poses the question, what if playing the game did matter? What if you had to beat the game, or the game would beat you? That's deep. The tale begins in a mall. We meet our main character, Ross, and Gary gives some exposition explaining that Ross was on his own a lot and learned to take care of himself. If he wanted something, he'd do whatever he had to do to get it. We see Ross find a quarter in a payphone. A payphone was a box that you would put money in to make a call back in the olden times. We then see Ross fishing a quarter out of the mall fountain before being assaulted by a crazed murder hobo who lays claim to the coin with the old legal argument of, I saw it first, it's mine.
If do right, no can defense.
A security guard starts taking an interest in the scuffle, causing Ross to just give up the quarter and make a run for it. He goes to the second floor and hides behind a glass case with a super soaker inside it, and I gotta say, this thing is featured so prominently that it is definitely coming back up again later in the episode. After the coast is clear, Ross goes to a shop called Olson's, and for the life of me, I cannot tell you what Mr. Olson sells or the business he conducts here. He has a medieval executioner mannequin holding a mace in the window, there's swords on display, and a pinball machine, and when we first see Mr. Olson, he seems to be repairing a small device that's shaped like a throne, so maybe it's a repair shop, but you never know it from the decor. In any event, he apparently has a job opening because the first thing Ross does upon entering is ask if Mr. Olson has thought about giving him the job. What's that job, you ask? Well, the tale never tells us. All we know about it is that Mr. Olson doesn't know if he wants to hire any more kids. Despite this fact, Ross tries to make a case for himself getting the job.
And I'd work cheap. Besides, you could use a talented guy like me around here.
Talented guy? All we've seen you do is find one quarter in a phone and lose another quarter to a bum. Story. Can you, show us he has a talent before making such bold claims? Anyway, Mr. Olson responds to Ross's statement as follows.
To do what? Play pinball all day? It's the only talent you've shown me.
Is that his talent? And is that how we're choosing to show that he has a gift for gaming? All it would take is a shot of him playing pinball and another kid watching and saying, oh man, you're about to break your own record. Boom! We know he's great at pinball. But, I guess we spent the budget for another actor to feature that Game Boy in the opening sequence? Those things were expensive back then.
Now you're playing with power, portable power.
Ross follows Mr. Olson into the back, claiming that he has plenty of talent and that he can be trusted. He says Olson would never have to fire him like he did Steven. Who's Steven, you ask? Well, the story never tells us. But Mr. Olson shakes his head no before Ross gets distracted seeing something under his sheet. If he gets curious and takes a look, asking if it's a new pinball machine, Mr. Olson quickly puts the sheet back and tells Ross to keep his hands off it because it's a collector's item. He also says that it doesn't even work right because it's missing a crucial piece, and he's clearly irritated by all of this, and he orders Ross to go back up to the front and play games there. Ross goes back through the curtain and starts playing on what appears to be the only pinball machine in the shop. He's playing the game for less than 10 seconds on screen when Mr. Olson comes out from the curtain and says to leave because he's closing up the shop. Then why did you tell him to go play games up front? Pretty sweet way to scam 25 cents off a kid, I suppose. Ross asks why he's closing since it's only 3 p.m. and Mr. Olson says it's because he hasn't had lunch yet and that he'll be back in 1 hour. Ross sees this as his opportunity To prove himself worthy, he asks Mr. Olson to let him watch the shop while he's gone. Mr. Olson says no at first, but then Ross makes the following argument.
What if a new customer comes by? If I'm here, you won't miss out on the business.
What business? What does he sell here? Is it drugs? It's drugs, isn't it?
This is crack.
Once again, Ross says that Mr. Olson can trust him. Mr. Olson finally relents, but gives him strict guidelines. He tells him to sit at the counter, don't touch the register, don't touch the merchandise, especially the new game in the back. Honestly, I don't know what counts as merchandise here. There looks to be some glassware on the shelves behind them, but everything else is just so random. I mean, is it a junk shop? I mean, is it a junk shop? If Ross finds a mogwai in a box, Warner Brothers needs to sue somebody. Mr. Olson still doesn't seem to trust Ross, but he says if he does well, he may give him a job. He then leaves the store and gives Ross one last disapproving glance. You know how adults do. The real question is, do you want to take the over or the under on whether Ross follows instructions?
Easy money.
You know, part of me wishes that's how the story ends. Ross sat there the full hour, and Mr. Olson was so impressed, he hired him. Legend has it that from that day forward, Ross was part of the retail workforce. Anyway, it takes Ross less time than he got to play pinball earlier to break the most important rule he was given. I don't get it. Ross's initial motivation upon entering the shop was to get a job from this guy. His interest in pinball seemed pretty slight, so why, when this guy finally gives him the chance to prove himself, which Ross begged for the opportunity to do, does he immediately run to the back and try the pinball game that he was already told doesn't work properly? I mean, I know why, so story can happen, but it just doesn't make sense with what was already established. Ross starts playing the jankiest looking pinball machine I've ever seen, while it's revealed to us that Mr. Olson is just out front and seemingly knows that his rules have already been broken. You see, this is why playing illegal pinball is a two-man job. You gotta have a lookout.
I told you I don't want to join your super secret boy band.
Ross seems to lose the game rather quickly before hearing the bell at the front counter being rung. He steps out front to find a teenage girl asking if Mr. Olson's around. The girl says she left her music box there and it's supposed to be ready for pickup today. Well, Ross responds as though he's never spoken to another human being before. Ross starts looking around aimlessly before finally asking what her music box looks like. She hands him a card which I thought was a photo of the music box, but after looking at it, Ross just learns that her name is Sophie. Anyway, he continues lying badly and not finding her music box until once again he asks what it looks like. This time, she says,
"It's a throne in a gold box."
Why didn't she just say that the first time he asked? Anyway, he still can't find the box and she has to point it out to him. He finally admits to her that he doesn't actually work there and he's just watching the shop while Mr. Olson's out. Sophie then opts to leave her music box there and come back later when Mr. Olson's returned. Ross then immediately goes into the back to start playing the ugly pinball machine again, and we are treated to an action-packed pinball montage.
This time I'm gonna crown the princess.
Well, as action-packed as a pinball montage can get.
Yes, second level.
I mean, as action-packed as a pinball montage that's not actually showing any pinball can get.
Oh no, which?
Ross finally loses the game and heads back out front, revealing that the rest of the mall is dark. He heads out of the shop, claiming that his mom is going to kill him. He tries to leave, but finds that the exterior mall doors are locked. He then hears a phone ringing, but when he gets to it to answer it, no one says anything at first. Ross starts to say that he's locked in the mall when this happens.
Got an umbrella?
Ross wanders over to see that quarters are falling from the ceiling? Sky? It's not really clear, but Ross says, "Hallelujah!" Ross pockets some quarters, then jumps into the fountain to start scraping up more quarters. Is this kid an idiot? I mean, I know he's an idiot, but like, how does he not see that something, dare I say it, hinky is going on? Does he just think it rains quarters at the mall after dark? Anyway, some background robo-rejects from a Devo music video show up and try to grab Ross, but it seems they're highly allergic to water and can't get to him. That's why machines will never take over the world. One rainstorm. Boop. Done.
Like tears in rain.
Ross then hears a girl screaming for help upstairs. He looks up and it's revealed to be Sophie. She shouts for him to get the tiara from the vault and drops a key down to him before being hauled away by someone in just terrible medieval cosplay. Ross splashes water at the bowler hat robots to drive them away from the key. He's not sure what vault Sophie was talking about, but he does manage to find some lockers. He sees that the key she gave him isn't a locker key, so he puts it away and just tries to open a locker anyway. As he opens the first one, this happens. I really don't know why I'm surprised. I mean, you couldn't watch anything on Nickelodeon in the 90s without seeing someone get green slime on their face. For some reason, the slime facial isn't enough to deter Ross, and he opens another locker, prompting this. If this was a Dungeons & Dragons game, he just failed 2 trap checks in a row, got hit in the face by a green ooze, and covered in acidic spores. Anyway, he opens a third locker, finally learning not to put his face directly in front of it. He finds a headband. Not quite a tiara, but close enough, I suppose. He picks it up, and then video game music of approval plays. I mean, there's a nearby escalator that lights up, which allows Ross to go up to the second floor, or the next level, as it were. When he reaches the top of the escalator, the slime has vanished from his person, and the headband has become an actual tiara. Ross also discovers the quarters in his pocket have turned into what looks like metal ball bearings. Sophie shows up again, beckoning Ross to follow her, which he does. She runs into an employee-only area, and when Ross gets there, he finds Sophie has been captured and yells for Ross to save the tiara and get to the throne. The witch advances on him, but Wait, is the witch the murder hobo from the beginning of the episode? And Sophie's a princess? And the security guard is the cosplay guy? If Ross wakes up at the end of this back on a farm in Kansas, MGM needs to sue somebody.
But it wasn't a dream. It was a place. And you were there.
The witch uses her rather potent morning breath to push Ross back out into the hall. She then steals the tiara from him and disappears. Ross tries to get back to where Sophie was, but he finds that the employee area has been blocked off. He can hear Sophie's voice, and she tells him to get the music box, so he heads back over to Olsen's. When he gets there, he finds Sophie chained up in the back room. He uses the key she dropped for him to open her chains, and he also tries to get some answers to questions like, "What's going on, and who are you?" To which Sophie replies,
There's no time.
I feel like the writer of this episode had the same exchange with the studio. What is going on in this script? What is Ross's talent? Who's the girl? What does Mr. Olsen sell in his shop? There's no time! They grab Sophie's music box before getting attacked by the executioner mannequin from the store window. You know, if that mannequin turns out to be Kim Cattrall, this tale just got a whole lot more interesting. Yeah. And also, 20th Century Fox should probably sue somebody.
Teach him to mess with a man and his mannequin.
They find the witch, who seems intent on putting the tiara on, but instead has just been holding it in the air and hissing at it all this time. Sophie pulls out her music box, and the song it plays causes the tiara to vanish, which in turn causes the witch to say,
They must have the throne.
Is she a witch or a vampire? Like, I've never heard a witch do so much hissing. Double, bubble, toil, and... Sophie puts the throne music box in the trash, stating that they have to hide it because they, whoever they are, can't get both the throne and the tiara, which I just noticed Sophie pronounces...
The tiara. We still haven't got the tiara.
Ross demands answers, but of course they get attacked by the executioner again before he can get any. Sophie tells Ross that he needs the mace the executioner has and that he needs to play the game. Fortunately for Ross, the executioner swung once with the mace before putting it down to chase Ross around with his bare hands. So, of course, Ross gets the mace and he and Sophie flee the scene. They don't get very far, however, because Ross stops them to ask the dumbest question he asks the whole story.
This is a game?
Of course it's a game! Literal video game noises have been playing every time you succeed at something, and unless I'm way off base here, you're probably reenacting the events of the ugly pinball machine you just played. They retrieve the tiara, but are attacked, and I'm using the word attacked very loosely, by the witch again. Sophie tells Ross to use the marbles. Does she mean the ball bearings? Those sure didn't look like marbles he had earlier. I mean, they are two different things. I would know. I did a video on the history of marbles. The marbles cause the witch to comically fall, and Ross does the worst Macaulay Culkin impression I've ever seen. The medieval cosplayer, who is actually billed as the sheriff, but who I will continue to call the cosplayer, shows back up and recaptures Sophie. She tells Ross to get the tiara to the 3rd level, throwing it away. Ross chases after it, finally getting back to the trash can where they left the thrown music box. The escalator to the 3rd level lights up and more fanfare music plays, prompting Ross to head up. At the top of the escalator, the tiara turns into a crown, and Ross says,
It's the pinball game.
Really, Einstein? You're just now figuring that out? Ross sets the music box on the ground and it turns into a full-size throne. He sits on it and the throne starts traveling through the mall, ramming him into the witch and a giant spider web? The witch then vanishes and then a gladiator steps out from behind it? What? How exactly is this the plot to the pinball game? The cosplayer arrives on the 3rd floor via the elevator. Sure, why not? I mean, everyone else has been appearing and disappearing at will, but this guy takes the lift. Anyway, he grabs Ross and tosses him in the elevator, sending him back to the 1st floor, which I guess would be a problem, except that Ross just heads right back up the escalator and finds the solution to all his problems on the 2nd floor.
On those occasions when you need to make a big splash, there's the Super Soaker 100. It has a powerful air pressure system.
Oh, Buffy!
Ross uses the mace to shatter the glass holding the Super Soaker. He grabs it, heads back up to the 3rd floor, and says,
This is some kind of game? You're playing with the wrong guy. Because I never lose.
Except that all we've seen you do is lose. Both times you played the pinball game, you lost. Anyway, he takes out all the baddies except the cosplayer with the Super Soaker. The cosplayer sneaks up on him and knocks the Super Soaker away, and then taunts him by saying you shouldn't play the game unless you know the rules. To which Ross replies,
But this isn't a game. It's real. And when it's real, you can make up your own rules.
What? What? Ross shoots the cosplayer with the mini soaker, causing him to vanish in a cloud of smoke, leaving behind a blue robe and the fresh scent of pine. Ross says they won, but Sophie says there's still one thing left to do. She sits on the throne, putting the blue robe on, and Ross puts the crown on her head. This causes her to disappear, and Ross finds himself back on the 1st level, very confused. It's then revealed that Ross is inside the ugly pinball machine, and Mr. Olsen is apparently evil. He starts playing the game with Ross inside while laughing maniacally. Well, come on. He's not going to get a high score like that. You can't focus when laughing with malicious intent. Get out of here. Inside, Ross sees a giant pinball ball. Pinball ball? Is it pinball ball? Or pinball? Or just ball? He sees a giant metal ball at the top of the escalator, and Gary ends the story as follows.
When Ross saw that ball, he knew that he would never get out.
I mean, sure, it seems grim, but Ross should just make the most of his time. You know, next time he defeats all the bad guys, instead of crowning the princess, take her to the food court. You know, go on a date, have a make-out sesh. Treat yourself. Also, it's implied that Ross suffered the same fate as Steve, so is Steve running around this imaginary mall somewhere too? Like, did he become the gimp in the gladiator outfit? Gary then tosses the Game Boy to David, who in turn tosses it to someone else, and so on, because everyone is now too afraid to play video games, which doesn't make any sense, because the story was about pinball, and just barely, so why would that make you fear the Game Boy? Also, who owns the Game Boy? If they go back home and explain that they gave their Game Boy away because of a scary story they heard, their parents are going to ground them, beat them, or laugh them into therapy. Everyone runs away, seemingly terrified, and Gary ends the meeting by actually pouring a decent amount of water on the fire for a change.
Till next time.
What? Was he looking at me? Or who was he looking at?
There's no time.
Now for the review. I'm so torn on this one. On one hand, I think the episode is a lot of fun, but on the other hand, I think it's a terrible, scary story. Now look, I know the show was inspired by The Twilight Zone, and I would say that this one feels very much like a Twilight Zone episode. featuring the character in a bizarre situation and is tackling a real-life issue, in this case, playing too many video games. Also, the mall setting was a nice change of pace, and the thought of being trapped in a mall at night is a frightening one, but the video game aspect kind of removed all the fear, immediately. And they could have capitalized on it, especially since they had some decent creature makeup with the witch and the bowler hat robots, but they were ultimately useless characters that presented no challenge for the hero. The pinball game plot was rather nonsensical and just seemed like an excuse to use some random costumes they had lying around. A clear game narrative that tied to the pinball game, or what probably actually should have been a video game, would have went a long way. The music helped out a lot throughout. It was eerie in places, but also featured those really nice video game nods at the appropriate times. And also, I did appreciate the grim ending of the story, with Ross being stuck in the game because he broke his word. Younger me wouldn't have found this story scary, but adult me wants to participate in the escape room version of it.
Hope you enjoy your free games. You'll be playing them forever.
The acting in this episode was kinda bad. To me, the problem here is the same as it was in the Tale of the Prom Queen. There's never really any tension, and there definitely wasn't any fear. The result is Ross just kinda there the whole time. He does things and he says things, but I never feel for him in any way because I just don't believe Ross is a real person. And that's probably the worst thing you can say about an actor's performance, but it's honestly how I felt. Sophie also didn't have much of a personality, though she certainly expressed more emotion than Ross did.
The tiara! Get the tiara to the 3rd level!
The adult actors, as per usual, get very little screen time. Mr. Olsen did a decent enough job playing the kindly old shopkeeper at the beginning, and then dialing it up to 11 at the end with that evil laugh. The witch and sheriff didn't really have characters. They were essentially just monsters. The witch was good when she wasn't pretending to be a vampire, and the sheriff had good evil line delivery but was weakened by his lame wardrobe, and that's definitely not his fault. He did the best with what he was given, and I do applaud him for that. So, Gary, it feels wrong for me to say this after the review I just gave, and it's only because of the fun factor here that I'm saying this. But your tale barely meets the approval of the Midnight Society.
Not scary, huh?
What did you all think of Gary's story? Did you see it as a kid? What were some of your favorite tales from this series? Let me know in the comments below. Once again, this was the Season 1 finale, so when we return, it'll be with the premiere of Season 2, The Tale of the Final Wish. Until next time, are you afraid of the dark?
Tiara. We still haven't got the tiara.
Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and a share. Be sure to subscribe and click that bell icon to be notified when more Midnight Society episodes go up. And we've got a ton of other cool shows on the channel, so stick around. You might find something else that you like.